Part B.2, Form Controller for Input Data. This part is the key part of this whole lecture. The main new feature we need to learn, input data part. We need to deal with the user's input data. And a lot of things, supporting features related to the input data. All right, so let's look at how do we do it. Yeah. First, we need to select appropriate controller that supports users' input data. Recall the previous controller we used in that Hello Spring example, abstract controller. That one does not support input data. So we cannot use that controller. So we have to use a different new Spring controller. So what's that? We need a controller to retrieve users' input data. All right. And we need a Java bean that carries users' data. All right. Yeah. So you can see a lot of preparation things we need to do. Yeah. And this Java bean is a special Java bean. It has the responsibility to do data copies. Yeah. So we need to learn a new concept called the data binding concept. So this is a very big concept. Data binding concept is a very big concept. Yeah. All right. The Java bean has the data populated automatically. Yeah. So the Java bean. Yeah. Think about usually if we want to put data, store data inside Java bean, we need to call setters, right? Call setters. We, the programmers, need to call the setters. But here, automatically, you do not need to call setters. The container will do it. The container will do this, populate the data. Yeah. All right, so but you need to do the setup. You need to tell the container, how to do it. Yeah. All right. Then there is another feature associated with the Java bean. Yeah. Validation, data validation. When you store data inside the Java bean, how do you know the data is valid? Right? Yeah. So the data validation step also is associated with the special controller. So you can see, yeah, not that simple. So a lot of things you need to do. And there is another thing you need to do. There is an error handling mechanism associated with the controller. When you associate with validation feature, then you need to consider when there is a validation error. How do you process the error? So then there is a error handling mechanism associated with the validation feature. Okay, error display, error formulation, right? That kind of details. You need to consider together with the controller. So you can see in this small, relatively simple example, a lot of things you need to worry about. Yeah. All right, so now let's look at the controller. Yeah. A controller supporting form data. Yeah. Here, we assume the user input data comes from an HTML form. So we call it form data. Okay. The properties. First, the Java object we use to carry the data, it is a regular Java bean with properties corresponding to the input form fields. Here you can see the, Java Bean properties used to match the user's input form fields. Then the data copies can be made in two ways. When you do data copies, you will do two-way copies, right? Read and write. Yeah. So this way, suppose the form fields here. I just write fields. Okay. Form fields here. Properties here. Right? Yeah. When you copy data from form fields into the properties of Java Bean, that's the write operation, right? You write data using setters with respect to your Java Bean object. The other way, going back, that's the read operation. You read data stored inside that Java Bean and display in the form fields. So that's the two-way operation. Yeah. All right, next. The setters and the getters are available for data copies between the properties and the form fields. Available here means we, as programmers, we need to make the setters, getters available. Otherwise, the data copy, the data binding part will break. Won't work. Yeah. That's easy for us, so we can do that easily. Yeah. Next, the container makes the data copies automatically through setters and getters. So you cannot see it. Behind the scene, you cannot see it. Yeah. But we know this kind of data copies will happen. And we do the configuration to help the container to do the data copies. Yeah. So later you will see we have to do configurations in many different places such that the data binding, data copy work can be implemented correctly. Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right. To use the data binding feature, we need to configure control. Yeah. In our next video, we will do this configuration. Okay. Yeah. Controller part, some special, arrangement. View part, some special arrangement. Yeah. So you need to know how to do those parts. So then the whole thing will work. Yeah. All right. So then some hidden rules are used when we switch to the annotation configuration. So later, after we practice a little bit, we will move to the annotation configuration because that's the modern annotation way. But when we move there, then we need to use a lot of hidden rules. Yeah. So we will learn those hidden rules and then to apply those rules, use those rules to understand how the data copy happen behind the scene. Yeah. All right, so next, let's look at the code. Yeah. A controller supporting form data. Yeah. So the first thing we need to choose the right controller. The controller name is called Simple Form Controller. Right? Simple Form Controller. Yeah, another special Spring controller. Yeah. Again, this is from the old version. Our new version, we won't use this class anymore. Yeah. Here, for our, good understanding, so we look at, this kind of special controllers as our background. Yeah. All right. This controller contains a special method. It is called onSubmit method. You can see from its name, it is bound to the submit button. Yeah. In the user's input page, there is an HTML form. The HTML form should contain a submit button. So when the submit button is clicked, then this onSubmit special method will be called automatically. Yeah. All right, so let's look at the structure of this method. First, this method will return that model and view data, just like our previous internal handler that method, right? For inside the abstract controller, return model and view this kind of object. Yeah. Then how to connect to the user's input data, because it has a special parameter object. It's called a command object. Yeah, I explained this concept, command concept before. Yeah. Command object. Yeah, that's the data binding object. Yeah. All right. So then we expect this command object carries the user's data. And then validation is associated with the special object. Yeah. And also here I give you the simple Java bean in this example. Yeah. Duke Spring example. This is our command object. Yeah. That's simple, command object. You can see the structure. We only have one property, setter and a getter for this property. Yeah. All right. But another special thing we need to put in this special method is the error object called a bind exception. Yeah. When error happens, special exception thrown. So this object we will use to carry possible errors. In case we detect some error situation, so we will write error messages into this special object. So you will see it in our next few videos. Yeah. Then data binding part, okay? The general data binding part, similar to the small diagram I drew in the previous slide. So you have the HTML form fields at the one side, the user side, and Java Bean properties the other side, container side. The container will work on this object. Yeah. Then two-way data copies. Yeah. The upper way, copy data from HTML form fields to Java Bean properties. The container use the setters. Yeah. Bottom, lower part data copy, the container calls getters. Yeah. All these method calling happens automatically. Yeah. So that's simple. Okay. All right. So next, let's look at the data processing inside the onSubmit method. Yeah. The data processing, here, the code here, we start with the command object. Since the command object using the general object format. The reason is in the original method, it does not know the user's specific Java Bean type, right? Yeah. So it uses this high-level general object type. Then, when we go down to the coding part, we need to do casting. Yeah. The command object, we know, we connect it to a special Java bean. Here, this user Java bean. So we need to do casting to convert it to the subclass, appropriate subclass. After that, we can call setter getters from this command object to read, write data. All right. Next, you can see why we use the special line, right? Why we use the special line. So there is some special reason because of data binding. Think about the data binding happens after we do the configuration. The next video, we will do configuration. After that, data binding happens automatically. And think about, if we do not do this step, the command object still has the username data in it. All right? Yeah. And data binding setup, two-way setup. All right. After the user clicks the submit button, data submit to the controller. The controller do the processing, then return the response back to the same JSP page. But this time, the data is still there, right? The command object still contains the old data. So you can see the submit button, click it, the input field still contains the user's data. So that's not what we want to see for the page. When we click, hello Duke, for example, that Duke example, that field just hello, some, user's name, for example, user's name. You click the submit button, then it display hello user's name at the bottom, but input field still contains the user's name. So that's not what we want to see. We want to remove user's name in the input field. So to do that, that's why after we get the data, we retrieve the data, we remove it. We remove the data corresponding to the input field. Then the user will not see the username in the input field. So that's simple. So that, special consideration you need to be aware of. All right, after that, why we do this? So think about why we do that. We need to store some data in the request scope. But why we need to store the data in the request scope? The reason is the input page will be used twice. First, before the user enters the data, we display that page. Okay, so that's once. Then, after the user submitted data, we return to the same input page, right? So before, after. So this part, the data is used to prepare for after case. After the user enters the data, so we want to tell the page display part, this is the second time we display the page, not the first time. Yeah. So we need some special piece of data to tell. So here with the piece is the pass. The pass piece has the value 1. If the pass piece has the value 1, then this is the second time we display the page. Otherwise, it's the first time. That's the purpose. So we use this request scope attribute to do that. All right. Otherwise, you may feel very hard to understand why we do this. All right. Then the last one also pretty special. ShowForm method. The ShowForm method is connected to this onSubmit method. ShowForm because we want to send the response to the original form. When you want to do that, you use the ShowForm method. If you do not send the response to the original form to another form, then you use a different way. So this is for the original form way. But when you return the response to the original form, remember, you need this data binding part connected to the page. So that's why this ShowForm method is special. ShowForm method is special. Yeah. All right. So then for the view part, this view part, I want to explain regarding the views connected to this controller. Okay? There are two types of views. The first type called a form view. So that's the original view page, form view. Okay, form, collecting users' data. And this is required. So this form view required. You always need to, whenever you use a simple form controller, you always need to connect it, configure it with the form view JSP. The second one is called a success view. After you process the data, the whole thing is successful, then you may want to use a new view page. So we call it success view. But this success view is optional. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you do not need it. Right? For our current example, we do not need a success view because even the data processing is successful, we still will return it to the form view, right? We still return it to the original view page. That's the form view. So that's why this method is called ShowForm, connected to the form view with data binding. All right, so that's the background. Although it could be a little harder to understand for the beginners, but try your best to understand this kind of background, the concepts, the logic, relationships, and we need this background to work on our project part 1. All right, so let me finish the